The creek was barely a foot deep. That was the thing Marcus kept saying afterward when he was trying to explain it to people who hadn't been there. Marcus Webb had been hiking with his son Owen for 2 years, since Owen was 18 months old and able to ride in the carrier, and then on his own feet. And now at 3.5, with the specific determination of a child who had decided that hiking was a thing he did and that he was good at it. They had a usual route, the trail along the seasonal creek 3 miles from their house, the flat section where the creek widened and slowed, and Owen had learned to throw rocks and watch them splash, the small log bridge, the return through the meadow. Duke was a 4-year-old yellow Labrador who had been on every one of these hikes. He was water-oriented in the specific way of labs. Given any opportunity involving water, he took it, and his role on the creek hike had settled over 2 years into an understood pattern. He waited in the shallows. He did not go past Owen's position. He came when called. He was not a dog who required significant management on this route. What he did at the flat section on a Saturday in June was not part of the understood pattern. Owen was at the edge, the usual spot, the shallow, sandy edge where he always threw his rocks. The water was ankle high. Duke had been in the water upstream, doing what he always did. He came out of the water, crossed to Owen's position, and took the back of Owen's jacket sleeve in his mouth. He pulled him backward, not gently, with the specific force of a dog that had made a decision and was implementing it. Owen went down on his backside in the grass. He cried out. Marcus was 20 feet back on the trail, and he covered it in 5 seconds. And what he saw when he arrived was his 3-year-old on the grass and Duke standing over him. And his first and complete thought was, the dog knocked him down. He had Duke's collar in his hand. He was saying the words he said to a dog that had done something unacceptable. The specific low calm of a voice that was not calm. And Owen was already getting up, and Marcus was thinking about the drive home and the conversation he was going to have with Dina, about whether this route was still appropriate. And he was thinking this when he heard the sound. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. He had heard this sound once before, on a camping trip when he was 12, when his father had grabbed his arm and said, "Move," in exactly the same voice Duke had used on Owen. The voice that didn't explain, that just moved you. He turned toward the sound. The flash flood came around the upstream bend with the specific color of disturbed earth, the brown red of a volume of water carrying everything that had been in its path upstream, where the afternoon storms in the mountains had been feeding the watershed for 3 hours. The front of it was moving faster than he would have thought possible in a creek he had always known as a foot of water. It reached the flat section in 4 seconds. The rock Owen had been standing beside, the usual spot, the ankle-deep sandy edge, disappeared under water that was moving at the speed of something that had been building for a long time and had nowhere left to go but here. Marcus stood on the bank with his hand on Duke's collar and watched the creek become something else entirely and did not say anything for a long time. Owen said, "Duke pulled me." Marcus said, "I know." He had let go of the collar. Duke was sitting beside Owen with the specific calm of a dog that had completed a task and was now at rest. He was wet from the wading upstream. He was not looking at the creek. He was looking at Owen. Has your dog ever done something you couldn't explain until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. The hydrologist Marcus spoke to, 3 weeks later when he was still trying to understand what had happened, not what had happened to them, but what had happened physically, explained the flash flood mechanism in the specific mountain corridor where they hiked, storm accumulation in the upper watershed, a narrow canyon section 2 miles upstream that constricted the flow and then released it in a surge, The surge moved faster than surface indicators at the lower section suggested. At the flat section where Owen had been standing, the warning time was measured in seconds, not minutes. The dog felt it, she said. She said this simply as someone who had studied watershed systems for many years and had stopped being surprised by what animals registered before humans. Infrasound. Low-frequency vibration that travels faster through the ground and water column than audible sound travels through air. The pressure wave of moving water at that volume. At that speed, in a canyon 2 miles upstream, a dog would feel it in the earth and the water before anything reached the audible or visual range. She paused. How long before the surge arrived did the dog act? Marcus thought. The time between Duke pulling Owen and the surge reaching the flat section, he estimated 60 to 90 seconds. She nodded. That's consistent with the propagation physics. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never ask for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. They drove home on the usual route. Owen was in his car seat, doing the half-asleep thing of a child who had hiked 3 miles and then had a significant amount of adrenaline and was now crashing. Duke was in the back, doing the fully asleep thing of a dog who had worked hard and was done. Marcus drove and thought about the 60 to 90 seconds, about his hand on the collar, about what he had been thinking in that moment, the drive home, the conversation about the route, the word unacceptable. He had been wrong about most of what he thought in those 60 seconds. Duke had known what was coming. He had done the only thing he could do about it, which was to remove Owen from the water's edge by whatever means necessary, and he had done it with the specific efficiency of an animal that did not have time for anything except the action. Marcus pulled into the driveway. He sat in the car for a minute before he turned it off. Then he got out and opened the back door, and Duke came out and shook himself once, the full body shake of a wet dog in a damp coat, and looked at Marcus with the brown eyes of an animal that had finished its work for the day and was ready for whatever came next. Marcus put his hand on the dog's head. The next story is about a dog who had been telling a family something important for 3 weeks. On the day they finally listened, they found out they'd been living with something they didn't know was in their house. Subscribe so you're there when it posts.